right. Well, let me welcome all the attendees to our security seminar this week. We once again are fortunate to have a really distinguished speaker to present to all of you. I've known our speaker, Bob Gourley, for over a decade, and he has a long career in the field, including serving for a while as the Chief Technology Officer of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which you may or may not know about, but it is one of the major intelligence agencies in the US government. And Chief Technology Officer is certainly an important role there, but he's done much more than that. He's run consultancies, he's a speaker on the circuit in very many places. He's a strategist and analyst that many seek out for his opinion. He recently is part of starting up an organization called OODA, which is based on the OODA loop concept. And if you're not familiar with that, you can look it up on Wikipedia. But it's basically for strategic intelligence in cyber and security generally. And it's, I hope it's off to a very successful start, Bob. But today, he's going to be talking to us about a big theme: defending the metaverse from the fearsome 5 threats. So he'll be telling us about both the metaverse and what those fearsome 5 threats are. When you have questions, please post them in the Q&A and he'll get to them either during or after his talk. So without further ado, Bob, please enlighten us.
Well, thanks, Spaff, and I really appreciate that very kind introduction. I wanted to say that I started my cybersecurity career, I started defending information from 1982 when I became a Navy intelligence officer, but I really started my cybersecurity career when I was helping the Department of Defense defend their computers and networks at JTF-C&D, Joint Task Force Computer Network Defense, in late 1998. And so in doing that, we had to learn quick a lot of things by the experts who'd come before us, and that included learning from Spaff. It was critically helpful being able to learn from Spaff and learn the many things he was teaching others, also the things he was saying to Congress and others in the executive branch, including congressional testimony, where he defined what a secure computer is. And I hope that that is one thing that everybody is taking away from your education today, the definition of a secure computer in Spaff's words. Because it really resonated with me. And ever since then, I have never talked about computer security the same way. I talk about reducing risk and becoming resilient. But in starting this off, I wanted to say something that Spaff missed from my bio that I'm most proud of is I'm a continual learner. I love to learn new technologies, new approaches, new defensive methods, new ways of analyzing information. And if you're in the cybersecurity space, there's always something to learn. And I also wanted to say this, and I don't want this to sound too gloomy. I also learned from my mistakes, and there's been a lot of mistakes. And some of my mistakes were huge, and some of them were collective, big, large-scale mistakes that a whole generation of people made. And I think if we can examine some of those in this brief, it may help us think through how to better defend in the future. So with that, I want to start with a quote. Listen to this. I think it's good context for what we're going to talk about. It's a letter, and the letter starts, "I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do." That letter was from over 2,000 years ago. It's from St. Paul in his letters to the Romans. But I mention that because I feel similar things about the internet. We never wanted the internet to be evil. All of us in the early days were thinking, this is a true force for good. It's going to push back on the dictators and push back on the communists. And information wants to be free. And it's going to help all of us be more free. And I think the internet is a good thing. I'm really an optimist and I love it, but it did far more evil than we wanted. And I want you to keep that in mind as we talk about the future of the metaverse. So with that, let me get into it here, and I'll tell you what I mean up front about the metaverse. We think of the metaverse as the next wave of internet technologies. There have been three waves, and I'll talk about those in a little more detail on the next slide. But this coming wave, I wanted to underscore, there's no indication it's going to be any more secure than the previous two waves. So keep that in mind. We need it to be secure, and it's not. It can be more secure if we, as the cybersecurity community, get more involved. I'm sure of that. So part of the purpose of this brief is to capture the essence of the metaverse, what it's going to be, and then we can start a dialogue on how to secure it. Now, what are these three waves of the internet? Think of the first wave as that beginning internet. It's interoperable computers, an interoperable comms protocol. It's the killer app was email, but also web pages, web browsers where you can click and go from one link to another. There was the establishment in the first wave of e-commerce sites where you could buy things and shop from home, at least a little bit. And then companies were building web apps for the first time where you could use the internet and then interact with the business in some ways. This first wave was almost 100% fixed line communications, either copper cable or a phone line, or sometimes fiber optic if you're lucky, but it's fixed line communications in that first wave. We still live with a lot of the first wave today. The PCs on your desk, a lot of hardwired systems, all of the e-commerce didn't go away. It's been modernized, but we're still living with the first wave. And of course, email will probably always be with us. But the second wave was really a revolution. And the second wave of computing, of the internet, from about 2010 until today was the mobile revolution. So because there was cell data and advanced Wi-Fi and other mobile comms, there could be high data rate to smartphones and the regular phones, but then smartphones also, and tablets and laptops. And it really did make a difference. Along with this second wave came this massive need to move a video and pictures that everybody was taking with their mobile devices. So streaming media was part of this second wave, as was the Internet of Things. And the second wave, as you can imagine, still relied on interoperable communications, but increasingly this was via very smart, well-designed cell communications that could deliver high bandwidth streaming video to a mobile device, but also Wi-Fi, especially the secure Wi-Fi for enterprises. Now we're starting to move into the third wave. All of the second wave is also here with us, but the third wave is this thing that people are calling the metaverse. It's a shared, interoperable virtual world where there's a trust layer for store of value, and there's persistence for your actions. So this user persistence will give you new capabilities online in these virtual worlds. So it's not just the first two waves of the internet, it is those, but also now an ability to be in the internet. That's what I think of as the context for this metaverse. Another point now is this is a very dynamic area. And if someone asks you for a specific definition of the metaverse, don't pin yourself down. I think that's going to evolve because this is a very dynamic and chaotic period. But we can frame it and kind of say what this thing seems to be. Broadly, the metaverse is a massive, infinitely scalable, shared virtual world where land and buildings, bots, avatars, and other property can be bought and sold and persist. I think of it as a future computing environment. The metaverse is not here today, but we're seeing hints of what the metaverse will be. And I have a slide coming up in just a second that shows some of what current metaverse capabilities look like. But you think of all of this current stuff converged and interoperable and interconnected, and all of that being easy to exchange interoperable value across. If you want an example of what this could be like, you can turn to science fiction. The term metaverse came out of science fiction. Snow Crash was a very famous science fiction novel that motivated a lot of us in the 90s because it was very forward looking and frankly painted a dystopian picture of a future world that we do not want. But it motivated us to build a better idea of a metaverse. But the term metaverse did come from this book, Snow Crash. And you can also turn to science fiction movies like the book Ready Player One and the movie Ready Player One gives a fantastic glimpse of what could be coming in the metaverse. Now, I mentioned it's not here yet, but it's clearly coming. And we have seen hints of what this is already. Of course, we all saw in the summer of 2021, Mark Zuckerberg declared that Facebook is a metaverse company, and he changed the name of his company to Meta. And that brings a lot of attention to this. And it says really that something big is coming. I don't mind telling you, however, that a lot of us are saying we don't really want Facebook defining the future of the metaverse for a lot of reasons. That's my opinion anyway. But still, it is coming. Hints of what the metaverse is, I list a couple on this chart. There's incredible business collaboration tools available today where you can get into a 3D environment with virtual avatars of your peers and others that you want to collaborate with in a business environment. And there's dozens of these kind of tools that are really working. Now, what about Zoom? Like this? This is a hint of the coming virtual environment. It's a virtual interaction. Now, very basic still, and not the advanced sci-fi stuff that is coming, but it's a hint of a distributed system where we can all come together and exchange information. And a lot of folks are getting exposed to this because of the online environment for schools today. And of course, the pandemic just taught everybody about Zoom. Another place where we have seen hints of what is coming is the gaming environment. Roblox being one of the most famous, Fortnite. There are many, many, many others, but Fortnite is so special because you can create an avatar and interact with others. Now, the reason why I say that is not the metaverse is it doesn't scale. You can have 20 million people watching a concert, but you can't interact with all 20 million of those other people. You are still in a limited domain of who you can interact with, but still, it's a hint of what is coming, and it's pretty exciting. Then there's the online virtual worlds, places where you can buy land and you can buy property. Like a Decentraland is one of the most famous, and Sandbox is another. For $10,000, you can buy a little plot of land. Maybe it's 15,000 today. I need to check. There's several others like this where you can buy land. You don't have to buy land to interact in there. You can go and just be a virtual avatar, and you can buy things if you want to, or interact with other people, play games. It is kind of like Second Life, but interoperable and distributed, and you can own pieces of that. Other indications of what the metaverse is going to be can be seen in things like Pokemon Go, where that's a blending of the physical world and the virtual world through artificial reality. Definitely there's going to be a component of that in the metaverse. On the business side, again, in the manufacturing world and in cities, there's this concept of digital twins. Give me a complete digital replica of a machine or a city or a ship, and I can operate that and see if I have a better idea for a better design or detect when a failure is coming. This is definitely going to be a key piece of the future metaverse. Now, the metaverse does not have to be something you enter with goggles on. You can enter the metaverse by watching a website or watching something on your mobile device. But for the best experience, people are wearing the devices like the Oculus Rift, of course, or the gaming devices. Some of the best are the commercial solutions like Magic Leap and HoloLens. And these are giving us hints of what the coming metaverse is going to be. As for the exchange layer of value, there's the Web3 revolution, still very early in its age. Still a lot of issues with Web3, a lot of fraud, a lot of criminal activity, but the promise is huge. I'm a huge believer in the future of Web3 And I believe this is going to be the interoperable store of value connecting all of these metaverses together. Other use cases include things like remote medicine, where through metaverse type technologies, you can get better healthcare through your medical professionals virtually, and participate in all sorts of kind of appointments throughout with the medical community. Some things you have to go in for. You have to get poked and prodded. You have to get blood samples drawn. You have to have things like that done in person. But a lot can just be the interview via remote medicine. So these are some of the things that we see coming today that are already here today. They're giving us hints of what's in the future. Now, let's talk about the future. I'm really excited about this. And I really think this is going to change a lot of how humanity works and plays together. We will live, work, and play in an environment where all of these interoperable technologies work on top of the existing internet. And it gives us an ability to have persistent interactions with each other. Like we can be there, leave, and come back, and things have, our avatar is still there, continues to live. We can have a second entity where we live. We can do this with billions of other people. Not today. This could be decades from now, but eventually a shared persistent simulation accessible by everyone at the same time. And again, I do think this is decades from now. Another point, every major company is going to have a metaverse strategy. Most of them are forming metaverse strategies already. And this includes all the big IT companies, but soon every company will have a metaverse strategy. What's the size of this industry? Estimates vary. I think it's $1 trillion industry, and I think it's sooner vice later. And one of the reasons I say that is, of course, the Facebook announcement, but all the major IT companies are investing in the metaverse, and money's being made there right now. So this will be a $1 trillion economy. Let me show you how one financial firm and an individual, Matthew Ball, describes this. Matthew Ball has been studying the metaverse for quite a while, and he captures the following components shown on this slide as being the places where there will be companies serving in this space. Of course, companies will build the hardware, and they will offer the compute services. There will be the comms fabric. The virtual platforms are built by companies like Epic or Unity 3D, and the many developers on top of those. The tools to build these capabilities are also like Epic and Unity 3D. Payment services will be that interoperable store of value that is going to really be huge. There's a lot of services around the metaverse already. I mean, for a decade, there have been people making their livings in virtual environments, building tools or building clothes and selling those in virtual environments. And these kind of content services will grow. So all of these are the kind of things that Matthew Ball are saying are part of the metaverse economy. And this is what gets us to $1 trillion economy. So very exciting. But this is all just background. It's background to get to where we, the cybersecurity community, can start talking about the threats and how to mitigate some of these risks. Because as I mentioned, my big regret being part of this wave of the first wave of internet technologies is we were a little naive, some of us were, to the fact that the internet had so many faults. We knew there were security problems, and we kept trying to address them, and we're still trying to address them. And we thought it was going to push back on these dictators and bad guys and evildoers, and it really hasn't. They have pushed back themselves and used the internet for tools of bad. So it's time for us security folks now to think about this next wave, the metaverse. I list here what I think the big 5 threats are. I don't have a full solution, although after this, I want to talk about a framework that might get us towards a solution. But first, let me review what I think these threats are. 1, new privacy threats because of the metaverse. Think of surveillance by corporations and by criminal groups and hostile nations, as well as just common fraudsters. Imagine a time when your digital life is online. It's already online. There's already more of you online than should be. But now imagine even more of you is online. And whether you realize it or not, you're being watched, and your avatar is being watched when you're not there. It's being watched 24/7, 365 to see what it will reveal. And it's being watched in a way to see what your desires are. So they can better market to you, or better flip you or turn you, or better deceive you. So this is a serious, serious threat with the coming metaverse. Here's another that, now this is not simply in the domain of cybersecurity professionals or even IT professionals. It's something that humanity needs to think about, and that's mass languor. This new wave of the internet, the metaverse, is so fun. I love it already. Imagine when it's almost like reality, and you get these super realistic simulations. Imagine the effect on your dopamine and your endorphin and oxycontin. Imagine the triggers and how much you're going to love being in the metaverse, all of us. So this is a threat that is, some of us will never want to leave, and we will reject those that try to pull us out of this. And so there's a worry there. Will this contribute to society's mental weakness and downfall? We need to think about that. The next one, the onorephrenia. This is a well-studied state of mind when people lose the ability to determine what is real and what is not. And this already happens a lot to people because of the virtual worlds that we're in and the massive continuous bombardment of misinformation and disinformation. The fear is that the metaverse is going to make misinformation and disinformation even more impactful. And so we cybersecurity professionals need to think about this and how we can mitigate that threat. Fraud will be with us for as long as there are human beings, I'm sad to say. And the metaverse is probably going to inject a lot of new fraud vectors. Companies and communities need to build in trust, and the bad guys want to violate that trust. And the more they violate it, the worse it's going to be for communities. And we, the security folks, need to participate in finding ways to improve trust and protect the digital value of the metaverse and keep the fraudsters from stealing money from individuals and companies and communities. I mentioned the last one here because this is something all of us need to be thinking about. Just about everybody in humanity needs to think about this. The internet has in many ways unleashed demons that should not have been unleashed, bringing like more bad people together in ways where they can secretly conspire to do their bad stuff. The worst of it, the child pornography, criminals, murderers, drug runners, slave traders, they all use the internet. Terrorists use the internet. Imagine now the metaverse, and imagine that unleashing even more demons. And then there's the other demons that we work so hard to train people on, things like the importance of fairness and equality and justice and the rule of law, and it applying to everybody equally, and pushing back on things like misogyny. Well, we've already seen cases where in 3D virtual environments, people have done bad things that they never, I'm sure, never would have done if they knew that they were being seen. But they get in the metaverse and it, for something, triggers on them. I don't know what it is, but there have been cases of horrible misogyny in interactions in the metaverse. There's actually been a case of a groping in the metaverse where a woman says she was felt because of the haptic device she was wearing, and many disgusting examples of things like that. We security people, I think, should play a role in figuring out how to mitigate this. Although we're not the only ones, everybody has to play a role in this, but we security people might be able to play a critically important role in mitigating some of that. These are what I think the 5 big threats are. Now, what's the solutions? I don't know, but I do know this. We security people learned a lot of lessons over the last 25 years, and we should contribute to finding solutions. And I think a lot of the old lessons apply, but we got to find some new solutions also. So my concept and suggestion, and I would love your thoughts and feedback, questions on this too, is that we need a framework. We need a framework for us to be able to lay all of our thoughts out and think, what is the right thing to do? Let me show you one idea for a framework. I believe we can establish a framework for metaverse security that's based on entities. This entity-based framework for metaverse security will help us ensure that the right things are being done at the right level to mitigate some of these risks. And here's what I mean by entities. I think the entities that need solutions are individuals, we, our friends, everyone in all of humanity as individuals. There are things we need to do. Communities, I hope most of the goodness in the metaverse is going to be delivered by communities coming together. Well, there's things communities should do to mitigate some of these threats. Companies, that makes the world go around. They deliver a lot of value. Companies should help mitigate some of these threats. Governments, especially open governments in good countries, should help mitigate threats. And there's things that we can spell out for them in a framework. And of course, academia, where there's so much brain power and talent and future-focused thinking. There are things that they can do to help secure the metaverse. I have a few ideas on each of these. Now, as I go through these ideas, I wanted to pause and take a breath and say, as you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box, because we'll have time at the end of this to discuss and answer these questions. Anything that you type into this, we will get into. All right, back to the framework. Individuals, there's a lot that we as individuals can do to reduce threats to ourselves and to others. Here's a few of my recommendations. I think that we as individuals need to learn, all of us, about the new cryptocurrencies and how cryptocurrencies can be protected and how cryptocurrencies can be stolen and how fraudsters try to trick you out of your cryptocurrencies. We need to learn about cryptocurrency wallets and the different kinds of wallets. There's online wallets called hot storage because they're connected to the internet. And then there's offline storage, offline wallets called cold wallets, which are not connected to the internet, extremely secure, but both have strengths and weaknesses. Also, we as individuals need to keep learning our security fundamentals. You need to protect your home computer and your home networks because that's just fundamental. If you have an adversary that gets into your home computer and they steal your credentials and steal your logins, you know, you're the weak link in the chain. We as individuals also need to continually learn privacy best practices. Our privacy will always be under attack, and there's just new methods of attack all the time. So this needs to be a continuous process. I think we as individuals need to think through pseudonymous accounts for the metaverse. We might want multiple different personas depending on what we're doing. Now, this is easier said than done because what we need is not just personas that are pseudonymous and cannot be tracked back to us, but can never be revealed in the future. And that is tough. Why? If you have a different persona for your gaming personality, a different persona for your news reading personality, a different persona for your concert going personality, and then a real name for your business work and community volunteer work, those five are all linked to the same geography. And you know, it is knowable that all five of those are the same. If a government really wants to dig into that, it can be discovered. And then, you know, all of that work you've done to build different pseudonymous accounts is all for naught because it's all connected. So we need to think about this. I'm a huge believer in pseudonymity, but we need to understand that there's risk that can just all be rolled back. I think we as individuals need to develop our expectations for the communities we work with, and also our expectations for companies. we need to be informed users of the metaverse and be able to tell communities and companies what we want. And in open societies, the way it's supposed to work is we are supposed to tell the government what we want them to do. So we need to think about our requirements for the metaverse and what we want the government to do in the metaverse. We also want to tell the government what we don't want them to do in the metaverse. And so we need to think about our requirements there and expectations. There's a lot we need to learn about the metaverse before we get into it. So that's why I mentioned here, know before you go. As individuals, you really need to study up on the platform you're joining in the metaverse and know about it. And I talk about these other things like mass languor. I think we as individuals are the ones that have to stop that for ourselves. And you do that through exercising and developing self-discipline. That's thoughts on some of the things for individuals. But now let's talk about communities. As I mentioned, I hope that it's communities that really develop the metaverse and bring the metaverse to reality. Because communities are groups of people coming together to do things that they want to do. And there's a lot communities can do to help secure the metaverse. I think it's at the community level where we need to find more ways to limit misogyny and limit bullying and cut down on fraud and manipulation of people. I think the community level has an extremely important role because communities can involve users and ensure strong feedback loops when users deviate from expected norms, including sanctions or removing from the community and keeping a good community free of the worst evils of our nature. At the community level, this is also a place where we can develop common interoperable standards, especially for things like store of value. I think it's going to be something like Ethereum, but whatever it is, the communities need to agree upon that, and that should be their role, I think. Communities do a lot of design work, and they do that in open, collaborative ways. The best of them do. And these open, collaborative communities, that's where security should be built in at the very beginning. Communities also have a role in auditing and testing themselves, and that should occur at that level. And then communities also need to, I hope, address this issue of ownerophrenia, easy for me to say, ownerophrenia, because here it's a tough one. We want communities to respect privacy. We really do. But it would be great if communities had a way of detecting if a person has mental issues and is becoming something that they shouldn't be in the real world. I don't have the answer to this. I'm just saying that I'm hoping communities can play a role in that. Let's talk a little bit about high-level recommendations for companies. Hey, companies exist to deliver value, and I really believe that this is a key component of the metaverse. Companies should be able to make profit, and that's great as long as that's not at the expense of society and not at the expense of our personal privacy and not at the expense of communities that many people will be volunteering time to build. So a high-level recommendation for companies, understand that profit is great, but do not do that at the expense of communities or personal privacy. Companies should also, of course, build security and privacy protections in at the beginning. Well, we've been saying things like that for decades, and I'm always the naive and hopeful one, and I think, oh, finally they're going to start doing that. But really, for them to do that, we're going to have to keep an eye on them and keep the pressure on them to do it. We being individuals, communities, and governments. Companies have a great opportunity to test their solutions through red teaming, adversarial exploitation of their systems to see how secure they really and truly are. The company should also work with users and communities to reduce risk to privacy and reduce the ability of criminals to operate in their part of the metaverse. Just some ideas. Now, let's talk about high-level requirements and recommendations for government. I believe that we as individuals should encourage the government to take these kind of steps. If we really want to reduce security, we need governments to help incentivize the companies and communities to build that security in early. We also need governments to help find ways to track and mitigate hostile intelligence services in the metaverse. They're already there, by the way. There's already indications of hostile espionage occurring in these early metaverse worlds. There's also indications of hostile governments using the metaverse already for propaganda purposes. And this is a threat that really, in our society, governments should be tracking and informing us on, because it's hard for individuals and companies and communities to detect and mitigate that. Well, government has a role in mitigating the hostile intelligence services. There's also a role for law enforcement, but it needs to be the right role of law enforcement. You know, we don't want the metaverse to become a surveillance tool for the FBI, for example. But we don't want bad guys to be able to run through what we're doing and use it for their gain either. So what's the right role for law enforcement in fighting crime, especially international crime in the metaverse? One thing in open societies, in all societies, we really need to push for is staying on the side of human rights and privacy when it comes to the government. Because the first thought for many might be to overreact and overreach and say, because there's threats, I will surveil everything. And that's not what we want. We don't want the government to become a bigger threat to privacy than they already are. And we also want governments everywhere to understand and respect human rights, because we're the humans. Governments can also share threat information, and I think that's a key part of the framework. Now, academia. Here's one where would appreciate your thoughts, would love your thoughts on this. What is the right role for academia in reducing the threats to the metaverse? Well, one is teaching requirements, also teaching common language to express security and privacy requirements, and teaching how to build with privacy and security in mind. There must be so many other things for academia, and would love your input on this as we go forward. Now, that was the framework piece. To kind of slow down and wrap up, I wanted to say, I think we really should start a dialogue, all of us. I would love it if everybody hearing this would start writing your ideas about security in the metaverse, and write via any source you have access to, your personal blog, your personal Twitter feed, your personal LinkedIn, Facebook. Ask questions and state your requirements and say what you think about the coming metaverse and the need for security. Also, in academia, write and publish and push about requirements for the metaverse. All of us as individuals should think about our requirements for the metaverse, our requirements for what we want companies and communities and the government to be doing in the future of the metaverse. And I also believe it's an extremely important point that we in the security community should teach our friends and family and coworkers and others in academia how to better protect their data today, and of course going forward into the metaverse. Really, this is something that all people ought to be thinking about. How do you protect your personal information now, and how do you protect it as we move into the metaverse? I have a few closing thoughts I want to share with you, just to keep the thoughts going. As I do, please think if you have any questions, ask them in the Q&A section here. We'll get to them shortly. Claude Shannon, very famous, not just academic, but leader of the revolution in communications, brought us into the digital world. I think he said it so well when it comes to security and risk mitigation. We have to assume that the enemy knows the system. It's going to be the same with the metaverse. We really have to assume that our adversaries, the criminals, the fraudsters, the hostile governments, are really going to know the system well. We need to know the system. And we security professionals need to design in mitigation measures that understand that the enemy knows the system. I thought great food for thought from Claude Shannon on the metaverse. John Boyd, Spaff mentioned OODA as the concept. We named our company as an homage to this mental model, the OODA loop. And I always think of John Boyd when I think of taking action. And when it comes to the metaverse, we should make a lot of decisions, but we also need to take action. And you don't just take action without thinking. That's reckless. And I think that was very well put by Boyd here. I think the framework is a good strategy. But for that, I wanted to mention food for thought from Winston Churchill on the metaverse and defending the metaverse. I think it's a beautiful strategy, but maybe it's not. What results are we going to get with this? What's the right thing? If you have an approach that works now, it may not work tomorrow. And we don't even know if this is the right approach yet. I really need your ideas to think through if this is the right approach. And I just like, as we talk about adversaries and what they're going to be doing in our networks, I love that science fiction so frequently expresses things about this dynamic world that are worth thinking about. So I have a couple charts here on science fiction. One from Ender's Game. Since when do you have to tell the enemy when he has won? As we think about the metaverse and the role of machines in our future, the whole plot of Dune was set in a world where people got fed up with their machines. There was no metaverse in Dune because these machines were not permitted to think. And I thought, how awesome. That was good. Some benefits of having adversaries also captured from Dune. Now, I think this is a little too harsh. I don't believe this is the reality, but it's interesting to think about. Enemies strengthen you, allies weaken. No, I think, look, allies strengthen you too, but it's interesting food for thought. That when you are in security and you're face to face with an adversary and you're trying to push them out of your network, you really should be learning. You should learn as much as you can. And you should learn how to mitigate the current threat. You should also learn how to mitigate issues of misinformation and disinformation. And I thought Dune was pretty good about that too. Now, why prepare? There's no evidence yet that the metaverse is a threat to society. Well, I just wanted to share this with you. When it comes to risk management professionals, just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. We should exercise our ability to think about future scenarios and mitigate the risk of those future scenarios. This is, to me, something any risk management professional should think about. Another thing that a lot of risk management professionals should think about is wisdom from guys like Spaff, who has been doing this for so long and is able to take a long view and say, here's what's changed and here's what hasn't changed through the decades. Another common friend said this, and I just wanted to, sorry, I have to go back here. Went a little too fast. Said this in 1991, Win Schwartau, pointing out that government and commercial computer systems are so poorly protected today that they can essentially be considered defenseless. 1991, he says this. And man, there's been a lot of improvement over the decades. There really has been. Some systems are far more secure and risk is mitigated, but so many new avenues of attack have come up. Society has been threatened because of computer security issues. And I just like mentioning this for context, saying there's been a lot of warnings for a lot of years, and it's time for us to really, really work to improve protections of our systems. Please, if you have questions, add them to the question and answer section here. I'm about to come off the slide presentation, but first I wanted to say, here's my contact info. Please drop me a note, connect to me on social media, send me your thoughts. What I love more than anything, if you want to do me a personal favor, is tell me where I went wrong. Tell me a better idea. Tell me how to improve any piece of this. And the next iteration I give, I'll give a better brief. So I would really, really appreciate your feedback. And with that,
So
Bob, how was
that? That was great. I wanted to ask if you had a chance to listen to the talk from last week from Chris Demchek.
No, I haven't, not yet.
So I think a very brief excerpt from that was the concept that we have major entities in this space who are building from a different set of values and goals than some of the ones you outlined. And if we spend too much of our time trying to argue what those are, the ones who are very single-mindedly building out to support their goals may become dominant. And that's a danger. And I think you illustrated that as well. But for purposes of the people who are listening in, this is two speakers in a row who are basically pointing that out, that what we have now is not the end result. We're still building towards something. And if we are not careful in defining what it is we want to build, we may not be overly pleased with the results of what we get. So thank you. That was great. We have 3 questions in the Q&A. So if you want to tackle those, that would be great.
Okay, cool. One, King Wan Yan says, from reality, the virtual world is growing rapidly and the impact on it is going to be wide. Will the progress of building the framework handle the development of the metaverse? How can the strategy be to ensure our privacy simultaneously with the growth of technology, at the same time, get rid of the growing range of people who might be involved in influence in the virtual world? I think what this is getting to is, how do we really articulate a strategy that's going to work in this new reality? Because this is going to be tough. And just like you said, Spaff, people are building this out. And the only way to influence this, I think, is if we get our ducks in a row and we start articulating what we want and what we expect. And so we need to get our requirements together and articulate that and say, here's the world I want built. And I think we need to do that in a way that involves government. But as I mentioned, don't bring too much government in. We don't want government surveillance of what we're doing, but we want to do this in a legal framework that is smart and well thought out. So I think we need to start pulling folks in like CISA, Jen Easterly, and start getting their thoughts. And maybe there's things that need to be done at the legal level. But really, it all starts with us as individuals getting our requirements together, I think. Another question. Thoughts on how we impose ethics in the metaverse where the traditional binds of societies may not apply. See, this is another really good one, because we want communities to come together from all over the world, different cultures and different backgrounds. And that's the way it's working today in a lot of areas. And the ethics that one group grow up with is not necessarily going to be the ethics of another. And that is even within a single region. People have slightly different approaches and you would say different ethics. And this is so hard. And I sometimes make flippant jokes, and I say things like, the way to handle that is just make sure everybody follows my ethics. But that's not right. Everybody should have their own ethical center and be able to come together in ways where we can dialogue and talk through that. And I think this needs to occur at the community level, where people know what community they're joining and what the code of conduct is for that community, and follow that code of conduct and those ethics. That's all I can say for now. Another, thoughts on the effects of highly immersive and customized advertising, which will become prevalent in the metaverse. Oh, you're so right. You know, in some communities, there's a fear, like imagine if Facebook decides that they're going to use all the data they're going to have on you to deliver ads. They will have, perhaps if you're using a headset, they'll have what you're looking at and what you're interacting with in ways that are going to let them know what you desire. For example, if you use TikTok today, they got so many great algorithms that are figuring out what you look at, how long you look at it, what you swipe to next, and how long you look at that next one, and what you hit the like button on, but also what you're dwelling on. So over just a little bit of time, they're starting to figure out what your desires are. And so now that they know what your desires are, they can better market to you. So imagine a metaverse that knows what your desires are. And as you walk around in the metaverse, your desires are being presented to you all over the place. And yes, I'll buy that and I'll buy that. So it should be highly effective advertising. The nightmare scenario for me would be if there's a world built like that was shown in Altered Carbon, which is a great science fiction series. And in that world, when you enter their version of the metaverse, you just get bombarded with ads, and it's really overwhelming and sickening. So that's the kind of world we don't want. Now, if we don't want that kind of world, there has to be some other way that communities get enough money to support themselves, or if you go the company route, that companies have money to support themselves. So those are just some thoughts there. Another question on concerns of the social metaverse. Concerns of the social metaverse and industrial metaverse may be very different. Digital twins, for example, and their human interfaces, for example. Does this proliferation of cyber physical systems require an entirely new paradigm? It definitely requires different paradigms. I think maybe there's some foundational security that needs to be done on all of them, but the interactions of a digital twin, I think, are going to be easier to restrict to, only 12 people need access to this digital twin for a ship design. Or if it's a digital twin of an entire city, maybe 300 people need access to this digital twin of the entire city. And if I need other people in, I'll invite them in. So maybe it's easier to control that piece of the metaverse, the digital twins. Another question. The promise of the internet in the early days was the free exchange of thought. That's so true. Today, we have fear perpetuated by governments and corporations restricting this exchange. Yeah, you're right. There's fear perpetuated by governments and corporations and groups, nonprofit organizations, groups coming together and promulgating fear. There's so many doing that. And also groups coming together and spreading misinformation and disinformation. And it's really the kind of threat that few of us anticipated, at least to this extreme. And I haven't heard the full answer yet. I have seen great people studying this and fielding solutions to pieces of it, but nothing that scales. And I really, really worry about it, because one thing about humans is, unfortunately, it seems like we like to deceive ourselves. A lot of us like to be deceived, and it gives us an open, fertile ground for misinformation and disinformation. How do we mitigate this? It's got to be some educational approach, I think. I don't know what it is, but it needs to start early. K-12 education on critical thinking. Not every school is the same and has the same curriculum. Many high schools today do teach some pieces of critical thinking, but it's kind of an oh, by the way. Maybe that should be the center of the whole educational experience, is how to think about analytical methodologies and how to think about your own human biases and all the wonderful research that's been done on that, and how to spot misinformation and disinformation. Maybe that should be the centerpiece of all K-12 education, and then a little bit of math and science on the side. Just a thought.
Well, I would react to that, Bob, myself, by saying that in my experience, and I think if you reflect on this, lots of organizations and individuals don't want to promote critical thinking and don't want to promote controls, because it would get in the way of them putting out their possibly false messages.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, we've seen that a lot recently, whether it's in politics, whether it's on views about what's happening with Ukraine, views on vaccines. We have a number of different viewpoints, and the people who are holding out with ones that may be contrary to the public good don't want their speech restricted.
Yeah. You know, I think you're so right. And way before the age of the internet, we can go back and see the ads for cigarettes where 9 out of 10 doctors prefer Camels, and smoking is good for you and it's good for the lungs. And it's just, that was believed and it was pushed by the advertisers. Even when evidence was coming out that it was cancerous, they continued to push that. And that's just one example. The next really, really big one in the time scale was the sugar industry. When I was growing up, and maybe this is an excuse why I can't keep the weight off, it was sugar is just calories like any other calories. There's no problem. Have as much sugar as you want. As long as you're counting calories, a calorie is a calorie. And that was all a bunch of BS. Sugar is like poison. And it's just one after another. The advertisers are bad. Of course, the polarized politics we can't get away from. But there's an example, I think, where a large number of people would not want a lot of critical thinking taught. And you're right, I think. In fact, some people would push back and say, if we propose critical thinking as the core of education everywhere, oh, there's government mind control. They're trying to control us all.
Yep.
I just, so I hope this isn't a gloomy thought, but I wish we had more critical thinking.
I well, as an educator, I agree. I think we have some issues there, and we actually are seeing a backlash now in a number of states where legislation is being introduced that prevents teaching anything that might upset students' parents in any way. So whatever their preconceived notions are, whether it's backed by history or scientific fact, they don't want it taught. Hopefully that's just temporary, but it goes to a lot of what you're talking about as to being able to move forward. We need an educated workforce. We need an educated populace who can actually think through some of these issues rather than being told what's right and wrong. And we're not at a point in our history right now where that's necessarily the universal, certainly, and maybe not even the popular view. And I hesitate to say that because it sounds gloomy, but you know, as somebody who's looked at history, I won't call you a historian, but we do have cycles of what people are willing to accept and what people are going to demand to be able to deal with challenges.
Right.
So you've got an audience here, and possibly others who will listen to this, who I think should take this to heart, that to think through, there aren't simple answers, but we have to learn how to think carefully about them.
Right. Well, thanks for the invite today. I really appreciate it, Spath.
It was great. It was great to see you again, and we'll let you know when the recording's up. For everybody who's tuned in, we will have another of these next Wednesday afternoon. The website has the list of all the upcoming talks, and have a great remainder of the evening. Goodbye, all.
Goodbye. Thank you.